If you're anything like me, your day probably started with a cup of coffee. It's just everywhere.
It absolutely is, and yet for decades it's lived under this cloud of medical suspicion.
Right, this idea that it's bad for your heart.
Exactly. Specifically, this deeply entrenched belief that caffeinated coffee is pro-rhythmic. That it triggers serious heart rhythm problems like atrial fibrillation or AF.
It's been conventional wisdom forever. If you get an AF diagnosis, the first thing they tell you is cut out the coffee.
Cold turkey. It's
Yeah.
practically dogma.
And that's really the core of our mission today. We're diving into the DECAF randomized clinical trial because, and this is just unbelievable, a high-quality trial to actually test this idea. It had never been done.
That's right. We have been making these huge dietary recommendations based on, well, observational data, not the gold standard.
So what was the DECAF trial's goal?
It was refreshingly simple, really, just to see what happens, to compare people consuming caffeinated coffee against people who completely abstain and see who had more recurrence of their atrial fibrillation.
A straight-up head-to-head comparison to finally answer the question. Okay, let's unpack the methodology. Because for you listening, understanding how they did this is key to trusting the results, which are, well, they're pretty shocking.
So the study was designed as a prospective, open-label, randomized clinical trial.
Okay, let's break that down. Randomized is the big one, right?
It is. It's the gold standard. It means people were assigned to a group completely at random to get rid of any selection bias. And prospective just means they track the outcomes going forward in time, which is much stronger than looking backward.
But what about open label? That immediately sounds like a potential problem.
It is, and that's a really sharp point. Open label means both the researchers and the participants knew which group they were in. You knew if you were supposed to be drinking coffee or not.
Which is not ideal. You want it to be double blind.
You do, but think about it. How could you possibly blind a study like this?
Right. You can't really make a placebo that looks, smells, and tastes exactly like a cup of coffee without being, well, a cup of coffee.
Exactly. So while you have to acknowledge that weakness, the randomization helps balance it out. The real question becomes, were the results strong enough to overcome that limitation?
I will get to that. So let's talk about the patients. Who exactly was in this trial?
The researchers enrolled 200 adults across 5 hospitals in the U.S., Canada, and Australia. And they were looking for a very specific type of person.
Okay.
They had to be current or previous coffee drinkers, so their bodies were used to caffeine. And they all had persistent AF or atrial flutter.
And what was the key detail about their medical situation?
They were all planned for electrical cardioversion.
So for anyone who doesn't know, that's a procedure where they deliver a controlled shock to the heart to try and reset it back into a normal rhythm.
Precisely. By enrolling patients right before this, the researchers were basically starting the clock for everyone from the same point, from a clean slate. It makes tracking recurrence much, much clearer.
So we're not talking about healthy people here. We're looking at AF sufferers who literally just had their hearts reset, which makes the findings super relevant.
That's the whole point. And the demographics were what you'd expect, age around 69, mostly men. They ran the trial over a few years and followed everyone for 6 months.
All right, let's talk about the two groups. The intervention. How strict were the rules?
They were very strict. The consumption group was pretty simple. They were encouraged to drink at least 1 cup of caffeinated coffee every single day.
So just maintain their habit.
Right. The abstinence group, though, they had a much harder job. They were told to completely abstain from all caffeinated products.
Not just coffee.
No, everything. Sodas, teas, energy drinks.
Yeah.
And they were also told to abstain from decaffeinated coffee.
Wait, even decaf. Why cut out the decaf?
That's a great example of how rigorous this was. Decaf coffee still has tiny amounts of caffeine, but more importantly, it has all the other compounds like polyphenols.
The antioxidant.
Exactly. Some people think those might be the protective part of coffee.
Yeah.
So by banning decaf, they made sure the abstinence group truly had 0 coffee compounds in their system.
Okay, that makes sense. But did people actually follow the rules? 6 months is a long time to quit coffee cold turkey.
They did. And it was remarkable. Both groups started at around 7 cups a week. During the follow-up, the consumption group stayed right there at 7 cups a week. The abstinence group, they successfully dropped to 0. So they got that perfect 7-cup difference between the groups, which means they could actually test the hypothesis.
Okay, the setup is solid. Clear groups, great adherence. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's get right to the main result. The recurrence of AF over those 6 months. What happened to the people who followed conventional wisdom and quit.
The recurrence rate in the coffee abstinence group, the people doing what we've told patients to do for decades, was 64%.
64%. Wow. Okay. Now, what about the group that was told to drink at least 1 cup of coffee a day?
Their recurrence was substantially lower. It came in at 47%.
47 versus 64. Okay, just let that sink in for a second. That is a huge difference that just completely flips the narrative on its head.
It absolutely does. Drinking caffeinated coffee was associated with significantly less recurrence than quitting.
It sounds totally backwards, but the data is right there.
And when they ran the full statistical analysis, looking at the risk over time, they found the coffee consumption group had a 39% lower hazard of recurrence compared to the abstinence group.
Let's pause on that term, the hazard ratio. For you listening, what does a hazard ratio of 0.61 actually mean in plain English?
Yeah, it sounds technical, but it's simple. Think of hazard as the risk of your AF coming back at any given moment. A ratio of 1.0 would mean no difference. Since the ratio was 0.61, it means at any point during those 6 months, a person in the coffee drinking group had a 39% lower risk of their arrhythmia returning.
39% lower risk, that's a powerful protective effect.
It's massive. And it held up even when they just looked at pure AF and took out the atrial flutter cases.
So before we get to the why, we have to ask about safety. Did this protection come at a cost? Any more side effects or adverse events in the coffee group?
No. And that's just fantastic news. The safety data was solid. There was no significant difference in adverse events between the two groups at all.
So it wasn't just effective, it was also safe.
Correct. Moderate coffee drinking seemed to protect against AF coming back without increasing any other risks.
Okay, so we know what happened. Now the fascinating part, why? For so long, the medical community was afraid of coffee. What was the mechanism they were worried about, and what's the theory that explains these opposite results?
Well, the historical fear was all about caffeine's role as something called an adenosine receptor antagonist. Adenosine is a chemical in your body that helps calm the heart down. Caffeine works by blocking its receptors. So the theory was, if you block those calming receptors, you get more electrical excitability, a higher heart rate, and boom, more AF.
It sounds perfectly logical. You're basically blocking the heart's natural brake pedal.
It makes perfect sense on paper. But coffee is so much more than just caffeine. And this is where the DECAF trial forces us to zoom out. Coffee is packed with hundreds of other bioactive compounds.
You mentioned the polyphenols and antioxidants.
Exactly, the anti-inflammatory stuff.
So are you saying the anti-inflammatory properties we hear about for other health reasons might actually be overpowering the stimulant effect of the caffeine?
That is the leading hypothesis right now. You know, AF isn't just an electrical wiring problem. It's often driven by inflammation and oxidative stress in the heart tissue. So if all those non-caffeine parts of coffee are tamping down that chronic inflammation in the atria, well, that protective benefit might just be way more powerful than the slight electrical kick from the caffeine.
That makes so much sense. The entire coffee package is anti-inflammatory, while caffeine by itself is just an excitatory stimulus. And in a chronic condition like AF, fighting inflammation might be the bigger battle.
And you have to remember, the abstinence group wasn't just quitting caffeine. They quit everything. They quit getting that daily dose of protective anti-inflammatory compounds they were used to. It's possible that by yanking that protection away, their baseline rate of recurrence just went up.
This trial has just monumental implications for how doctors talk to patients.
It really does. I mean, think about the quality of life here. We've been telling AF patients they have to give up one of the most common, most enjoyable daily rituals.
And now this evidence says not only is it safe, it might actually be helping them.
It could be therapeutic, yes. At least for preventing recurrence after a cardioversion. It completely flips the script from you must stop to it's okay to continue.
So this gives doctors strong evidence to, well, stop telling every AF patient to quit coffee, especially if they're only drinking a cup or so a day.
And we have to keep coming back to the quality of the data. This is a randomized clinical trial. It's the highest form of evidence, and it just overwhelms all the observational data and fear that came before it. The default advice should probably change.
But let's be really precise here so we don't overstate things. The study looked at a very specific group of people, current or previous coffee drinkers with persistent AF who are getting a cardioversion. Why is that narrow focus so important?
It's crucial because it addresses the most common scenario a doctor faces. These are patients who already have a relationship with caffeine. Their bodies are accustomed to it. This study does not tell us what would happen if a healthy person who has never touched coffee starts drinking it to prevent AF in the first place?
That's a totally different question.
A completely different question. This is about preventing recurrence in people who already drink coffee.
So the takeaway is, if you're a coffee drinker and you have AF, this trial suggests you shouldn't feel you have to quit, and maybe your doctor shouldn't be telling you to.
Absolutely. And there's another layer here. The fact that the abstinence group, who were long-term drinkers, did the worst. It raises a question. Was the sudden removal of caffeine and all those other compounds a stressor in itself?
Like a withdrawal effect almost.
Well, it could be. A sudden change in your daily biochemical routine might have been counterproductive. It's definitely something to think about.
Okay, let's bring it all home. Summarize the central takeaway for everyone listening.
The DECAF trial showed us, with the highest quality of evidence, that among patients with persistent AF who were already coffee drinkers, continuing to drink about 1 cup a day, was associated with a statistically significant drop in their AF coming back compared to quitting entirely.
And that drop translates to a nearly 40% lower moment-to-moment risk of AF returning after a cardioversion. It's a huge evidence-based challenge to decades of medical advice.
And that brings us to the final thought for you to mull over. We've stressed that this trial only looked at people who were already coffee drinkers, people who have a history with it and, presumably some metabolic adaptation to caffeine.
Right. So what's the thought experiment?
Well, what if you ran this trial on a population that had never consumed coffee before? A group of caffeine virgins, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you randomize them to either start drinking 1 cup a day or take a placebo.
Would the result be the same?
We have no idea. Would their bodies experience the same protective anti-inflammatory benefits? Or would they be more sensitive to the raw electrical excitability from the caffeine because they aren't used to it? The entire relevance of these incredible findings is framed by the baseline status of the participants. The fact that they were drinkers to begin with.
And that's a critical distinction to remember.
It is, and is where future research needs to go.
And that is our deep dive. We hope you feel thoroughly informed and maybe just a little bit surprised by this complete reversal of conventional wisdom. We'll see you next time.